or presentations. Abolish the system of the 1%. All right. Oh, what would Marx think? We can only imagine what Marx might think if he saw the global crisis of capitalism today. One might imagine he'd be a little astonished that capitalism was still around so many years after he had passed from the scene. I know he thought it was ripe at the very time that he and Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto. If you read the Communist Manifesto, which was published for the first time in 1848, it's so crisp that it could have been written yesterday. It's not a bad idea. I kind of hope the comrades in the Education Committee will consider a class on it, but I don't have to tell them that. Comrade Marx might be a little impatient that the working class hasn't got its act together and rose up and rid the world of capitalism and wage slavery and private property and emancipated itself and set about building socialism and communism on a world basis. But we do not think that he would have given up on the working class even if he was a little astonished and a little impatient. Because just as he knew that capitalism, no matter how deep the crisis, no matter how severe the crisis, was not going to end itself, that it had to be ended by the working class. He knew that every crisis that capitalism somehow survived, most of the time because it was allowed to survive it by the dearth of struggle, that new lease on life for capitalism was temporary, and it would only create the basis for the next crisis, which would be even worse than the crisis before, and then the next crisis, which would be even worse, and the next, and the next, and the next. And this is the process, comrades and friends, that brings us to today, where we are now in the midst of the most profound global crisis of capitalism in its entire history. And perhaps the system needed to ripen just a little bit more, and the working class and its organizations had to learn a few more lessons. This is something that we can only say in hindsight. The chapter that we're in of the history of the class struggle against capitalism on a global level is just being written. We are helping to write it. One of the things that this crisis is doing, as all crises do to one extent, and that is to convince more and more workers that they have to get rid of the system, that it can't be reformed, and also to have the opportunity to prepare the class struggle and prepare the revolutionary struggle that will ultimately do away with capitalism. And I think that in its own way, what I'm saying has a lot to do with the development of the Occupy movement. Perhaps not in a big way, but perhaps in a sort of a baby step way. See? Let's look at the material conditions that brought about the Occupy movement. We're well aware of some of their contradictions, which are important, but it's also important to look at the material conditions. The biggest feature of this global crisis, this permanent crisis, we've written on it and we've got a new book, no end to the crisis, is massive unemployment, which is not to forget austerity and budget cuts on a global basis in Greece and California and Spain and here too. But it's the massive unemployment and underemployment, see? And it not only affects the poor and the oppressed, but now it's affecting those who used to be called or consider themselves middle class or even above the middle class. By the millions, It's a global phenomenon. There used to be a time when if you were white and thought yourself to be middle class and got the college education, or maybe even an advanced degree, you felt that you had a future in capitalism, under capitalism. That's over. We've talked about it, and we've charted it, and even the ruling class admits it. It's over. This may not be the only thing fueling the Occupy movement, which is global. There's May 15th in Spain. But it's one of the big material factors behind it. A large number of people who yesterday thought they had a future in capitalism woke up and capitalism said, hell no, or go to hell. I know that we go over their contradictions, and we must, especially the problem of forging meaningful solidarity with the working class, especially the most oppressed. And May Day was a big challenge for them, because it wasn't just the unions. It was, how do you forge solidarity with those who are really targeted and for whom we have to protect as best as we can? The immigrant workers, many of whom have no documents and could be dragged away and are dragged away and deported or kept in cells for weeks and months or years. It was a big lesson. My sense of what Comrade Teresa said is that the jury's still out. Some did good, some did lousy. There'll be more tests. There'll be more tests. But I just want you to imagine for a second how it could have gone the other way. Imagine if some of these young white folks, angry and desperate, would have become fodder to fascist rhetoric or the Tea Party. So when you look at it that way, they're moving in the right direction. They're becoming radicalized, more anti-capitalist, in an amorphous, confusing way, but moving toward the working class. And it is significant with all their baggage that for whatever reasons they chose to say, we are going to reassert ourselves not only in New York, but on the national scene on May Day, International Workers' Day. I can tell you that there have been times when there's been a petty bourgeois movement, but they did not come to that conclusion, you know? They're moving toward the workers. Yes, Marx would have been disappointed, I imagine, that this movement that we call Occupy did not embrace communism and socialism immediately as the theory of revolution, the theory and practice of revolution. But he would have understood that, given the fact that at least for about a generation, if not longer, rammed down our mouths has been this notion of capitalist triumphalism, and communism and socialism have failed, and now there's only one system, the only system there will ever be, and that's capitalism, and how that has affected the world and the culture. And so, yes, we have to be a little patient in winning people to communism. But that doesn't mean that we're patient in how we do it. Because when we get out there and talk communism, we win people over. All of the bullshit, all of the reactionary propaganda that we have been fighting for all too long, it's not thick, it's thin. And it's flaky. And if you blow on it enough, it blows away. And if you beat it with your hand, it literally collapses. And this is what we are finding out. You know, I saw an article that was sent to me on the internet. Some of you might have got it. Very interesting article that appeared in the website of Bloomberg News Service. Yes, this is the Bloomberg News Service started by the multi-billionaire mayor, rival to CNBC, servant and part of the ruling class. And this article was entitled, "Can Occupy Replace the Labor Movement?" and it referenced a huge demonstration of unions on Solidarity Day that took place almost to the date 40 years earlier than September 17th. I need about a minute more.